On today's show, we are going to do a simple exercise. Who is the worst pick in each round of 2024 fantasy football drafts? We will go round by round. Each of us will discuss, debate our selection. Evan, who is the worst pick in round one?
For me, it's Jonathan Taylor. Um, I have him as a second to third round turn sort of player. He is right now on like home league ADP. He's a late first rounder, 1.11 specifically on Yahoo. Jonathan Taylor is a running back, puts him at a high volume running back, high carry volume running back, which increases his injury risk, and that has affected him over the last two seasons. In particular, 13 missed games over the past two seasons, primarily due to recurring ankle injuries. He has not been a meaningful passing game producer going back to his time at Wisconsin. And Anthony Richardson, the Colts quarterback, has all but ignored targeting running backs, even going back to his own college career. He also poses a direct threat to Jonathan Taylor's touchdown upside because Anthony Richardson can be used in that tush push role. He's 6'4", 244 pounds. Shane Steichen, of course, the Colts head coach, was an assistant in Philadelphia in 2021 and 2022. Obviously, very familiar with the tush push. The Colts have the kind of offensive line that can execute that. And so, very low receiving potential for Jonathan Taylor. And I don't know what his touchdown upside is. And that's a real problem when you combine those two things.
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor's Yahoo ADP is 9.9 right now. That is ahead of A.J. Brown. That is ahead of Garrett Wilson. That is ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs. That is ahead of Puka Nacua. To me, that is absolutely insane. I had the same thing. Jonathan Taylor, worst pick in round one. Part of the reason that Jonathan Taylor projects reasonably well and his ADP is so high, I mean, they have nothing behind him, Evan. We're going to get to this tomorrow. But I mean, they're going into the season, I think, with Trey Sermon and Goodson as their backups at running back. I mean, you could see Jonathan Taylor playing almost every snap. And I know the pass game stuff hasn't been good, but that's like the volume bull case for Jonathan Taylor. I still think he's the worst pick in
I
round
mean,
one.
if he stays healthy, which he has not done in consecutive seasons, I mean, I think he could lead the NFL in rushing.
Right.
Um, but still, low receiving upside, and Anthony Richardson posed an obvious threat to his touchdown upside.
All right. Let's go to round two, Evan. Who is the worst fantasy football pick in round two this year?
And it's for pretty much the same exact reasons that I don't like Jonathan Taylor in the first round is Saquon Barkley. In the second round, he goes early in the second round. This is the best offensive environment of Saquon Barkley's career. But again, Jalen Hurts has a long history of low running back target rates. The Eagles are not getting rid of the tush push. We've heard from very reliable sources. Nick Sirianni has like this affinity for Kenneth Gainwell. Like these backups, could pose a little bit of a problem for Saquon Barkley. Jonathan Taylor doesn't have to worry about that. But Kenneth Gainwell can cut into like 2-minute situation stuff. And I like Will Shipley as a talent. The Eagles only kept 3 running backs, which, by the way, I think makes Will Shipley a little bit of a sleeper because I think he's much more talented than Kenneth Gainwell. But these guys could cut a little bit into the touches of Saquon Barkley, who, again, you worry about his touchdown upside. You worry about his receiving potential, which in the same backfield as Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. And I am on board with that fade where Saquon Barkley goes to some degree. He goes 13.1 here. Very similar to Jonathan Taylor, as Evan said. My worst pick in round two is Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams will turn 32 years old in December. I'm expecting the Raiders to have a very run-heavy attack. And I like Antonio Pierce, but he could go full boomer on this. Play really good defense, play really slow, try to hide their quarterback situation. I mean, I know we've talked about it. I thought Gardner Minshew was better than AOC for Devontae Adams, but still, the Raiders didn't even want to name anyone their starter. Gardner Minshew was horrible in the last preseason game. They were like, well, I know he didn't play well, but I guess we're going to go with Gardner Minshew. So it is real ugly. They're going to try to hide that. Yards per route run for Devontae Adams last year was down to 1.97. Not great. Obviously, a lot to do with quarterback play there, but just the guys that he goes around. I prefer Puka I prefer Marvin Harrison. I prefer Drake London. I prefer the 49ers guys, Nico Collins, Olave, Cooper Kupp. I prefer all those guys over Devontae Adams. So my worst pick in round 2 is Devontae Adams. Let's go to round 3, Evan. Who is the worst pick in round 3?
It's Travis Kelsey, and people were taking him like fourth, fifth, sixth overall last year, and I faded him as like I like you would never get him if you were using my rankings because I had him late in the first round, early in the second round, which I thought was pretty aggressive in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
But people just went overboard drafting Travis Kelsey last year. Now this year I have him as the tight end 2 overall behind Sam Laporta, and that's his consensus fantasy ranking. But I have a fairly large difference between Sam Laporta and Travis Kelsey. Sam Laporta is like a decade younger than him. Last year, Travis Kelsey only went over 100 yards twice. He's now entering his age 35 season, and the Chiefs sound intent, and I believe them, on scaling back his snaps to keep him as fresh as possible for the playoffs. He's got other interests off the field, obviously his babe, but
$100 million podcast.
His $100 million podcast.
Where's our $100 million?
So the Chiefs go out and sign Marquise Brown. I know he's going to be out for the first couple games. He did not go on IR, though, by the way.
Yep.
So I think that they're anticipating him to be back by week 2 or week 3. They traded up for Xavier Worthy, and they got Rashee Rice coming back, who's going to be a full-time player after being a rotational player who played barely 50% of the snaps last year. It's just the ball isn't going to go to Travis Kelsey as much this year. He's going to be used situationally, and they're going to rest him for the playoffs. The only reason he's coming back is to go to the playoffs, dominate the playoffs like he did last year, and win another Super Bowl. It's not to mess around during the regular season. I think that he gets that too, especially in light of all of his other interests.
Yeah, we have a sleepers and busts article up on the site where everyone on the staff contributed one sleeper and one bust. My bust in that article was indeed Travis Kelsey. I just totally agree with Evan. There's no need to overuse this guy. Even last year when they really did need Travis Kelsey last year. Even when they did need him, he had 6 games under 50 yards, only scored 5 touchdowns, and they're going to reduce his routes. He's like so likely to set a career low since he really broke out in routes this season. I would add that in round 3, I'm not taking Sam Laporta either. Sam Laporta's Yahoo ADP is 27. It's just not necessary. Are we sure that Sam Laporta is a better prospect and has a better outlook than Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, Mark Andrews? I mean, those guys are my main targets at tight end, and they go 20 picks or more later. And even if we miss on that tier, that McBride, Kincaid, Andrews tier, there's still Kittle and Pitts. And then there's the Ingram and Ferguson tier. And even if I ended up with Njoku or Brock Bowers, like I can live with that. So the state of the tight end position has changed. I don't think that by getting a Laporta at 27 overall, you're necessarily gaining that big of an edge over the field anymore. So going for a round 3 pick on that, I just don't think is right. Give me Olave, Achane, Josh Jacobs, Drake London. All those guys have a similar ADP to Laporta, and I prefer them. All right. Round 4, Evan, who are you not taking in round 4?
Rachaad White. And I think that people that drafted him were very satisfied with what they got last year, okay? He was going like 7th round, something like that. People were worried about like Chase Edmonds. Chase Edmonds was not good and now is not even going to play this season. But they have to realize that Rachaad White was carried almost entirely by volume. He was 2nd in the NFL in carries, 4th among running backs in receptions. But the Bucs were not a successful running game whatsoever. They finished 27th in success rate. They were dead last in yards per carry. And that was with Rachaad White handling 76% of the rushing attempts on the team. They can't play that way. Okay. And like Todd Bowles, a defensive minded coach, is not going to want to play that way. I mean, he's not going to view that as a sustainable way to play. Bucky Irving, like he's only 192 pounds. So I don't know if he's going to be ready for a workhorse role anytime soon, but he's looked really good, I think, in the preseason. He's a really good pass catcher. And I think that there is a chance that he could eventually overtake Rachaad White for the Bucs starting job because, I mean, especially if Rachaad White remains as inefficient as he was last season. He was really, and I know this is hard for people that had him in fantasy to hear, he was really one of the worst starting running backs in the NFL last season.
Yeah. The only counter is that everybody has struggled to run the ball in the Bucs, right? Like maybe it's a systemic thing. with them where they just can't be efficient running the football. But yeah, I mean, Rachaad White's underlying stuff is bad, bad. Could not agree more. It's crazy. Like, I always read Evan's shy away, and I always agree with most of Evan's shy away list. This year, I agreed with like every single one on Evan's shy away 30. Highly recommend everyone read that. I thought Rachaad White is an awesome round 4 fade as well. I'll give two more backs that I'm fading in round 4, Joe Mixon and James Cook. I can make a case for either one of those guys. I like them both better than I like Rachaad White. It's just not the archetype of running back that I want when we have Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman, Steph Diggs, Lamar Jackson. All those guys go in that same range as Mixon and James Cook. On Mixon specifically, I guess he's theoretically a good fit for this scheme, but efficiency always a huge concern. Cam Akers has looked incredible this preseason. He made the team, as did Dameon Pierce. So it's a bit dead zone-ish for me on Mixon. And similarly on James Cook, he's going to see competition from Ray Davis and Ty Johnson, plus all the Josh Allen tush pushing. Like, I'm okay with these guys, but I'd much rather take those wide receivers or quarterback that I mentioned over these running backs, Rachaad White, Joe Mixon, James Cook. Let's go to round 5. Evan, who is the fade for you in round 5?
It's George Pickens. And I think that people look at they want to look at the on-off splits for when Deontay Johnson was off the field and George Pickens was on, and like looking at what is Van Jefferson really going to open the season as the Steelers' number 2 receiver? Like the target share projection for George Pickens, it should be really, really high target share. But how many times are the Steelers really going to throw the ball? They have 2 quarterbacks that they're going to end up playing probably. Justin Fields fits best for an extreme run-heavy attack, and I think that Russell Wilson fits into a run-heavy attack, and that's what Arthur Smith, the Steelers' new offensive coordinator, has historically run in almost every stop that he's ever been in.
Yeah.
You look at the number 1 receiver. I mean, Drake London was the number 8 overall pick in the draft in 2022, and he barely got above 900 yards last season under Arthur Smith. And Drake London is, I think, a far more skilled receiver than George Pickens. And that's nothing against George Pickens. George Pickens is a big play threat, no question. But 866 yards in 2022 for Drake London, 905 yards for Drake London last season. So the target share is going to be high for George Pickens, but the overall team pass attempts are going to be really low. I mean, I think that Najee Harris could legit get 300 carries for the Steelers this year. They want to run the football. They invested a ton in their offensive line. And also the Steelers went after Brandon Ayuk. I think that might be a hint that they don't envision George Pickens as a true number 1.
Yeah. I mean, couldn't agree more. I've done over 100 best ball drafts. I think I have like 2 or 3%. George Pickens right now. Talked about him on Market Monday a little bit more for more on that. Totally agree, though. Easy fade for me on Pickens here in round 5. I'm going to go with Aaron Jones as the worst pick in round 5. ADP is 53 overall on Yahoo. Aaron Jones will turn 30 years old in December. He has had real problems staying healthy, not only missing games, but just like always banged up, on the injury report, limited, whatever. On top of that, Vikings love Ty Chandler. I don't want to get it twisted where they signed Aaron Jones. That means Ty Chandler is dusted. I think Ty Chandler is going to play a lot. Ty Chandler is one of my most owned running backs where I get there in the round, pick 140, pick 150 or so. And then I just have overall offensive efficiency concerns. Like, I love Kevin O'Connell. I think Sam Darnold can play a little bit better than the public perception is, but I just generally have concerns overall about the offense and how it's going to fare here with Sam Darnold.
The Vikings only kept 2 run as of today. They could add a guy, off waivers or something like that. But the Vikings right now only have 2 tailbacks on their active roster, and they may feel comfortable with that because they have C.J. Ham, who's like a little bit of a versatile fullback. But right now, Ty Chandler should be an absolute priority. Draft him a couple of rounds ahead of his ADP. He's a guy who should be on every Establish the Run listeners' fantasy team at this point. I mean, he, for all the reasons that you outlined.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Let's go to round 6, Evan. Who's the worst pick in round 6?
So we're doing 10 rounds worth of fades here. This is probably the one that I have the most trepidation on fading because James Conner was really good last year. I think we all like the Cardinals offense. James Conner can be like a true every down back. Um, but he missed multiple games due to injury for the fifth time in the last 6 seasons last year. The Cardinals followed up. They used the 66th overall pick on Trey Benson, who averaged over 6 yards per carry and over 11 yards per reception at Florida State. James Conner and looked really good as the preseason progressed. Trey Benson got better and better and better. James Conner's 29 years old. He's got almost 1,400 career touches under his belt. That long injury history. I think that this is really just betting against James Conner to hold up physically. Take Trey Benson in like the 10th round and let somebody else take James Conner.
You might be able to get Trey Benson later than that at this point. I mean, the FUD is out on Trey Benson big time. No one wants this guy. I've seen him slip into like the 140s in best ball stuff from time to time on Trey Benson. Yeah, my biggest fear on James Conner fade is he was awesome last year. Like when he played, he was very good. He did not look like he was wearing down at all. I also just want to have systemic bets on the Cardinals offense. But yeah, I think the gap has gotten too wide between Conner and Trey Benson, most likely. My fade in round 6 is going to be Ramondre Stevenson. If Antonio Gibson is going to be the breather back and the pass down back, I mean, what do we really have with Ramondre Stevenson? This Patriots team is not going to score a lot of touchdowns. The offensive line is 31st in the league per Brandon Thorne. I think Drake May, who I expect to be named the starter tomorrow, I think Drake May is super interesting for fantasy, but probably not ready for real life behind the 31st offensive line in the league. And I don't even think Ramondre is any kind of special back. His ADP is 64. That's higher than Tank Dell, T. Higgins, Zay Flowers, Jordan Love. I mean, I would have a really, really hard time taking Ramondre here. And again, all this stuff, all my fades the last few rounds have all been running back, which is, again, why I'm trying to get running backs earlier in the draft so I can hammer wide receiver through this range. Let's go to round 7, Evan. Round 7 fade for you.
So I kept looking at this to make sure. Brian Robinson's ADP is in the 7th round.
That is not what it is on Yahoo. Brian Robinson is at 98.5 on Yahoo, which is
8th, 9th.
Right at the beginning of the 9th round. Yeah. 8th, 9th turn. Yeah. But we can go with it. Do you want to fade him in the 8th or 9th round?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then let's go with it.
I'll stick with it. Okay.
Good.
So Brian Robinson is ticketed for an early down grinder role on a team that could be the worst team in the league. The win total for Washington is 6.5. It's tied for 4th lowest, but they've got an abominable offensive line. I think Brandon Thorne has them as the worst offensive line in the league.
Yep.
Yes, he does. They bring in Austin Eckler. I think Austin Eckler can be the starter on this team. I know that Austin Eckler looked totally washed last year, but he was also coming out that high ankle sprain. We know what that can do to skill position players. It can absolutely ruin your season. I just think that Austin Eckler is going to easily outsnap him. He's going to take – Brian Robinson actually did pretty well in the passing game last year. Austin Eckler is going to take all of that. This team is going to play from behind constantly. It's just I do not want early down grinders on bad teams. That's a situation that I want to steer completely clear of.
Yeah, and when you're playing in a redraft league, like I want to reach for more upside. I don't think that Robinson is necessarily a terrible pick, but I don't think he ever completely breaks out. And when I'm playing redraft in these rounds, like round 8 or 9, I want someone more upside so that if it doesn't hit, I can just move on. These kind of grinder types aren't worth as much in redraft. My fade in round 7 is Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott's ADP is 67 overall. Meanwhile, Jaden Daniels' ADP is 103. Caleb Williams is 113. Now, in practice, I don't actually think the gap between Dak and those rookies will be that wide in most drafts, but it probably will be 2 or 3 rounds. And in that case, as much as I do like Dak, and I think he gets too much hate, I think he's underrated, I don't want to burn a valuable round 7 pick here when I can just wait. I can just wait for Jaden Daniels or Caleb, especially since Dak doesn't have the rushing floor. And especially since, and I'm curious what you think about this, Evan, the receiving core for Dak is actually kind of ugly. I mean, if CeeDee Lamb were to get hurt.
I was just going to say that. I mean, what do they do then?
I mean, then Dak's in big trouble if CeeDee Lamb gets hurt, And so that scares me a lot. I mean, they have like Brandon Cooks and Tolbert and Ferguson and like Zeke, and they just signed Dalvin Cook today. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's ranking change show. But yeah, so I like Dak, but but I don't like him in round 7 when I can get guys much later.
I like him as a real life player,
Yep.
and I do not like him as a fantasy player. He doesn't have a safe floor, and he doesn't really have a ton of ceiling because he doesn't run, and he's got one receiver.
Yep. And it's fragile to that one receiver, so yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to round 8. Evan, who is your fade in round 8?
Eighth round. So I think that Tajay Spears is going to maintain a role over the course of the season, but I think that Tony Pollard is better than him. I think that we saw that down the stretch last season. I think we've seen that in the preseason. Tony Pollard's explosiveness and burst looks all the way back. Um, I think that it could. I think that in all likelihood, Tony Pollard can get a 60-40 edge on Tajay Spears. And Tajay Spears has those like his knees are hanging by a thread too.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody really talks about that anymore. But I mean, that's why he kind of slipped in the draft a little bit, because he has like serious long-term arthritic knee condition concerns. Also, Tajay Spears was inherited by the Brian Callahan regime, whereas they went out and they gave Tony Pollard $7 million a year, one of the top, the 10 highest paid running backs in the NFL. So I like Tony Pollard, drafting him, and I'm steering clear of Tajay Spears.
Yep, I like that one too. I kind of thought it was even when I first started drafting, but lately I've been taking Pollard over Spears pretty relentlessly for sure. Yeah, round 8 fades for me. I agree with Spears. Brock Purdy is, I think, a really bad pick in round 8 along the same lines as the Dak thoughts. I had Zach Moss on this list right before we logged on here. Samaje Perine went to the Chiefs. I thought there was some chance Zach Moss would get chumped a little bit here by Perine, but I do think that if I'm deciding between Moss and Chase Brown, I still prefer Chase Brown, who's going 20 picks later than Zach Moss, is just a more explosive player. So yeah, some ideas there in round 8. All right. Round 9, Evan, who is the worst pick in round 9?
I have it Jonathan Brooks, and I mean, I would assume that he is dropping like pretty big time right now. I dropped him big time. I had him like right around number 90 overall as of yesterday, and I dropped him to like 120. Um, he's behind schedule in his recovery. When the Panthers traded up to draft him, they said that he was going to be ready for training camp, and then they said no. We think he'll be ready early in the season. Maybe week 3 or week 4, and then they placed him on NFI, reserve NFI, which works the same as reserve PUP. And that means he's definitely out for the first 4 games, and then there's a 3-week window. But out for the first 4 games, how buried are the Panthers going to be by the time that he comes back? How are they going to be super incentivized to give him a full workload? I just don't know. There's no level of certainty there, and you're certainly not going to be able to use him for at least the first 4 games. So I'm letting other people draft him. I get it in best ball. I don't want him in my home league.
Canales has also been adamant. We love this kid. He's a long-term part of our plan. We're not going to do anything to jeopardize his health. To me, that reads as even when he gets back, he's going to be eased in. He's not going to go 20 carries. And on top of that, Chuba Hubbard can play, man. I'm telling you, Chuba Hubbard can play. There is absolutely no reason to give Jonathan Brooks 20 touches a game.
Coaches love him. I mean, coaches have shown a willingness to give the ball to Chuba Hubbard a lot.
So I think the one thing that I'd say on Jonathan Brooks for home leagues is that if you have an IR spot, I'd be willing to use it on Jonathan Brooks. Probably not in round 9 here, but yeah, at least you have an IR spot. To me, it's better than, obviously, if you don't have an IR spot and it's a short bench, then you just can't take Jonathan Brooks. If you have an IR spot, it's at least worth, I think, considering a little bit later. But yeah, I'm with Evan. Been out on Jonathan Brooks pretty much all offseason. There are certainly a bunch of people at ETR that disagree. Fade for me in round 9. Don't take Jared Goff. Don't take Jared Goff when Jaden Daniels is there at the same price. The fade in round 9 for me was one we already talked about. Austin Eckler. I get what Evan's saying. I would also question, though, how much will Jaden Daniels check down? Will Austin Eckler hold the goal line work over B-Rob? And the thing is, there's just other good running back bets around where Eckler goes. If you need early season volume, Devin Singletary, Jalen Warren slipping a ton on this hamstring stuff. Javonte Williams, I'd prefer over Austin Eckler. Chase Brown, Jerome Ford, Blake Corum, Rico Dowdle, Jaleel McLaughlin. I think there's similar bets to Eckler at the same cost or cheaper that I like better. So fade for me in round 9 was indeed Austin Eckler. No problem fading this entire backfield in redraft throw if need be. All right. Last round here, Evan. Who is your fade in round 10?
Jacoby Myers. I mean, just no reason to draft a second receiver on a team quarterback by Gardner Minshew slash Aiden O'Connell. If you remember, Jacoby Myers got off to like a really nice start last season. He was surprisingly super productive actually early in the year. And then his boy Josh McDaniels got fired. And over the last 10 games of the season, he averaged 42 yards per game. And we can't deal with guys who are averaging 42 yards per game.
Yeah.
So we got McDaniels is gone. We got a horrible quarterback situation that's worse than it was last year. And as you mentioned before, when you're talking about Devontae Adams, Antonio Pierce is going to run the piss out of the ball. Just no reason to draft Jacoby Myers.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much of a ceiling here. And we get to the 10th round. I have an article up called Favorite Flyers, where guys I think have more upside than Jacoby Myers round 10 plus that I would consider. My fade in round 10 is someone who actually does probably have upside, but my fade in round 10 is Keon Coleman. I know everyone is excited. You have a rookie with Josh Allen in a weak wide receiver room. I just think that they're going to be very flat on target share outside of Dalton Kincaid. Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel are going to get theirs. Mac Hollins is going to play a ton in the Gabe role. So I think we have holes in Keon Coleman's profile, and then we also have holes in how he's going to be used and how this offense is going to run generally. So Keon Coleman has like the kind of upside that I like in redraft where you're going to know pretty early, like, is he going to play enough? Blah, blah, blah. Is he good enough? You can cut him, etc. So I get it from that perspective. But just generally, I don't really like Keon Coleman. I haven't even taken him very much at all in best ball. All right. That is going to do it for 2024 fantasy drafts. Worst pick round by round. Please remember what I said about the bundle. Scroll up to the top, beginning of the show, if you need more details on that. Be sure you subscribe to our YouTube. We are going to do, myself and Daigle are going to do a live stream of a home league draft. I've gotten so frustrated because we have nowhere to do live streams of drafts that reflects accurately what happens in home leagues. We did that FFPC one. I thought we had a solid draft. It is in no way reflective of what happens in home leagues. So me and Daigle on Thursday are going to pop on and just do a regular Yahoo mock. And hopefully that helps you guys understand how we would play it in these home league setups. So be sure to subscribe to our YouTube for when we go live with that. For Evan, for producer Luke, producer Ryan, I'm Adam. Good luck, everybody.